The screen fades in with a soft piano melody, the kind of sound that feels like it carries forgotten memories. A single candle flickers in the darkness, illuminating only the edges of an old desk. A stack of papers rests in the corner, untouched by time except for one letter, creased, smudged, but never sent. Sometimes, the narrator begins, their voice trembling with both gentleness and intensity. The most powerful stories are not the ones we hear out loud, but the ones that were never spoken. This is the story of the last letter she never sent. The camera zooms in on the page, the handwriting delicate, as though each word had been pulled from a soul too heavy with emotion. And then, our story begins. Her name was Aika. She was a girl who never believed her life would matter to anyone. Quiet, reserved, and often overlooked, she lived in the shadow of others, her heart filled with words that longed to be free but always stayed caged inside her chest. Aika had always carried notebooks filled with poems, half-written thoughts, and sketches of things she wished she could say but never dared to. She wasn't the kind of person people noticed in crowded hallways. In fact, if you passed her on the street, you might only catch a glimpse of her black hair swaying in the breeze, or the way she clutched her satchel close to her body, as if it carried her whole world. And in truth it did, because inside that satchel was the letter. Aika wrote it every night, and every night she crumpled it, rewrote it, and then folded it carefully before tucking it away. It was addressed to someone who had changed her life without even realizing it. His name was Ren. Ren wasn't the top student, nor was he the kind of boy who everyone adored. He wasn't flawless, but to Aika, he was different. He noticed small things, the kind of things others ignored. He once held the library door open for her when her hands were full, offering her a smile so genuine it lingered in her memory for days. He once returned her sketchbook after she left it on the bench, pretending he hadn't peeked at her drawings, even though his red ears gave him away. He once asked her opinion in class, even though she rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice shook. But he listened. He always listened. And to someone like Aika, who had spent her whole life invisible, those moments were everything. So she began to write him a letter. Not just a note of thanks, but a confession. A confession of how his kindness had become a light in the darkest corners of her world. A confession of how she admired him, not just for his smile, but for the quiet strength he carried in the way he treated others. A confession that perhaps, against all odds, she had begun to fall in love. But Aika never gave him the letter. The story shifts. Rain pouring outside a dim-lit window as Aika sits at her desk, pen trembling in her hand. She whispers words as she writes, almost as though speaking them would give her courage. Ren, if only you knew how much your presence has changed me. If only you knew that every time I see you, the world feels a little less heavy. Her tears smudge the ink, but she keeps writing. The music swells with emotion, strings echoing behind her words. She folds the letter once more, slides it into an envelope, and stares at his name written neatly on the front. For a moment, she imagines herself handing it to him, his expression softening as he reads, maybe even smiling. Maybe, just maybe, he might feel the same. But the fear always wins. The envelope goes back into the satchel, buried beneath books and papers, hidden from the world. What Aika didn't know was that time has a cruel way of taking chances from those who hesitate. Weeks turned to months, and her days with Ren slipped away. Graduation was approaching, and with it, the inevitable scattering of paths. Still, the letter remained unsent, the weight of it growing heavier in her heart, until the day everything changed. The classroom buzzed with noise, the usual chaos of students counting down the days until freedom. Aika sat near the back, her satchel resting quietly by her feet, the hidden envelope still tucked inside. Ren was only a few seats away, laughing with his friends, his voice warm and genuine. She stole a glance at him, her chest tightening. That's when their homeroom teacher made the announcement. Graduation is only 2 weeks away. Some of you will stay here, but many of you will be leaving. Treasure these moments while you can. The words struck her like lightning. 2 weeks. Only 2 weeks left to decide whether to give Ren the letter or let it be lost forever. That night, she sat awake, staring at the envelope. The silence of her room felt suffocating. Her heart battled between courage and fear, hope and despair. She whispered into the darkness, "If I don't give this to him, will I regret it for the rest of my life?" But her doubts chained her. Every possible outcome played in her mind. What if he laughed? What if he told others? What if he didn't feel the same? The idea of rejection felt unbearable. So, once again, the letter remained unsent. The day of graduation arrived like a cruel thief, stealing time faster than she could hold it. Students filled the courtyard, caps and gowns brushing against each other as families gathered, cameras flashing to capture fleeting smiles. Aika stood by herself, clutching her diploma in trembling hands. She searched the crowd for Ren, spotting him near the stage, surrounded by laughter. He looked so alive, so bright, as though the entire world bent itself toward him. For a moment she imagined walking over, handing him the envelope, and finally letting her heart be free. Her steps faltered, her courage faltered, and before she could move, Ren was gone, lost in the sea of goodbyes, swallowed by the future that awaited him. The letter remained unsent. Years passed. The story cuts forward, city lights glowing against the night sky, cars rushing by, and Aika walking home from work. She was older now, her features sharper, her hair tied back, but her satchel still clung to her shoulder. Inside it, tucked in a hidden compartment, was the same envelope. She had carried it all these years, unable to let it go. Every so often, she would unfold it and read her own words, as though reliving the person she once was. Sometimes, the ink looked faded, the smudges darker, but the weight of the letter never lessened. And then, one rainy evening, fate twisted in ways she could never have predicted. The sound of thunder cracked as she ducked under the awning of a small bookstore. She shook the water from her umbrella, and when she looked up, her heart froze. Ren. He stood across the street, older too, but unmistakably him. His posture, his smile, the way his eyes still carried warmth. It was him. Aika's breath caught, her pulse racing so fast she thought her chest might burst. For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming, but no. The rain was too real, her heartbeat too wild. This was real. Her hand trembled as it reached for the satchel. The envelope was still there. After all these years, the letter had waited for this exact moment. Maybe fate had given her another chance. But the light turned green. Ren stepped off the curb, walking further away. Panic surged through her veins. If she didn't act now, she might never see him again. Aika clutched the letter so tightly her knuckles turned white. And then, she froze. Her courage betrayed her once more. She watched as Ren disappeared into the night, swallowed by the city just as he had once been swallowed by the crowd at graduation. Her body collapsed against the wall, the rain mixing with the tears on her cheeks. The letter slipped from her trembling hands, falling into a puddle, its ink bleeding into unreadable stains. The last letter she never sent was gone. Yet, this wasn't the end of her story. Because sometimes the letters we never send are not meant to reach another person. Sometimes they're meant to reach ourselves. The rain poured endlessly that night, and Aika stood frozen beneath it. The letter that once carried her entire heart now lay ruined, its words dissolved into ink stains that the earth swallowed. She knelt down, her hands shaking as she tried to rescue the paper, but it was too late. The fragments of her confession clung to her palms like ghosts of a love that never found its voice. Her chest ached, not just from the regret of losing Ren, but from the weight of years spent hiding her own heart. That night, Aika sat alone in her small apartment. The torn pieces of the letter spread across her desk. The candlelight flickered, shadows dancing on the wall, as though mocking her silence. For the first time in her life, she whispered the truth aloud, though no one was there to hear it. Ren, I loved you, and I'll never know if you could have loved me too. Her voice broke. Tears fell freely, but in their wake came something unexpected, not just sorrow, but release. For years, she had carried the letter like a burden, a chain of what-ifs that kept her trapped in the past. But now, as she stared at the ruined envelope, she realized that the act of writing it had already changed her. Even if Ren never knew, even if her words dissolved into the rain, the truth was that she had dared to love. And that mattered. The scene shifts to a soft sunrise. The city awakens, its skyline painted gold. Aika steps outside, her satchel empty for the first time in years. Her steps are slow, thoughtful, but lighter than before. In her hand, she clutches a new notebook. On the first page, she doesn't write Ren's name. She doesn't write regret. She writes something else. This is not the end. This is my beginning. From that day forward, she began to write again. Not letters she would never send, but stories. Tales of hope, of heartbreak, of courage found in the quietest souls. She poured herself into her writing, each page a mirror of the emotions she once feared to show. And slowly her words reached others. 1 year later, Aika stood in a small cafe where local authors were invited to read their work. Her palms sweated as she approached the microphone, her voice trembling as she introduced herself. But when she began to read her story, the last letter she never sent, the room fell silent. Every word she spoke carried the weight of her past, but also the fire of her rebirth. She watched as strangers leaned forward, their eyes wide, their hearts connecting with the rawness of her truth. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. In that moment, Aika realized something profound. The letter had not been a failure. It had been a seed. And though it never reached Ren, it had blossomed into something greater. Her silence had finally become a voice. Time marched on. Aika's stories began to spread beyond the cafe. She published her first book, a collection of letters and poems that spoke of unspoken love, silent courage, and the strength hidden in regret. To her surprise, the book resonated with thousands. People from all walks of life wrote to her saying, "Your words are my story too. I also had a letter I never sent. Thank you for giving voice to what I couldn't say." Each message filled her heart with a warmth she once thought impossible. She realized that her greatest fear, being invisible, was never truly real. She had always mattered. Her voice had always mattered. And though Ren's name was never spoken aloud, he lived in the lines between her words. Years later, destiny played its hand once more. Aika was signing copies of her latest book at a crowded event. Fans lined up, clutching her work to their chests, eager to meet the woman whose words had touched their souls. And then she froze. At the end of the line stood Ren, her breath caught in her throat, time collapsing around her like the day they graduated. He was older now, just as she was, but his eyes still carried that same warmth, that same quiet kindness. When he finally reached her, he offered a smile, gentler than she remembered, tinged with something unspoken. He placed her book on the table and said softly, "It's been a long time, Aika." Her hand trembled as she signed his copy, her pen hovering, as if waiting for the courage she once lacked. Ren looked at her for a long moment, then added, "I read your story, the last letter she never sent. It was beautiful. I couldn't stop thinking about it." Her chest tightened. Did he know? Could he possibly have known? But instead of explaining, she simply smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time she realized the truth. It didn't matter if Ren had ever felt the same. What mattered was that she had lived, loved, and transformed her pain into something that reached countless hearts. Her letter had never been wasted. The story fades with Aika walking out of the event, her heart steady, her steps strong. She no longer carried an envelope hidden in her satchel. Instead, she carried something far more powerful. Her voice, her courage, her truth. The narrator's voice returns, calm yet powerful. We all carry letters we never send, words we hide, emotions we bury, confessions we lock away. But sometimes those unsent letters are not failures, they are teachers. They remind us of who we are, what we feel, and what we're capable of becoming. Aika's story is not just about love lost, it's about finding the courage to write your truth, even if the world never sees it. So, what about you? What's your letter? And will you find the strength to finally let your voice be heard? The music swells, strings and piano blending into a crescendo of emotion as the screen fades to black. Text appears on screen, the last letter she never sent. Then, if this story touched you, subscribe to Anime Odyssey, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your story matters too.